Now, this is just one kind of system one thinking, right? Perception is even more common. So, when we see things, we go outside and we see traffic moving around and we adjust to it, etc. We know that that's a highly skilled activity, that in fact babies can't see that way, etc. They have to learn to see. But when we're become routinized to see, we just see. Even though it's a highly cognitive function, your brain has to actually do a lot of work to take all that information and turn it into a street scene in which you have to get out of the way of the car soon. But the point is, most of us don't do any thinking. It just happens. It's one of the things that makes us vulnerable to things that we're not expecting to happen, or we don't see it coming, as we often say, when we're surprised by something. Now, what the research seems to suggest, in fact, is that retributive punitive judgment is essentially a system one response. So according to Darley, dual processes contribute to moral judgment. One process produced relatively rapidly is the product of social cognition and emotional responses, takes place non-optionally. This is the intuitive system discussed above. The second process involves abstract reasoning, areas of the brain, ones that developed evolutionarily later than did social cognitive and emotional brain areas and are not always triggered into action. So here's, I guess, a takeaway point. The experimental psychology seems to indicate that we're all retributionists on some level, but it doesn't suggest that we're all Kantians. That is, it's not like we've accepted Kant's reflective theory of why retribution is a satisfying rational explanation. We instead have this intuition that takes us to more or less the same place. Now, how do we know that it's the same place? Well, the way these experiments work is by, as I said, creating scenarios and getting people to make moral judgments about them, and sometimes measuring in some ways their emotional level, their response to it, as well as varying the story to tease out moral differences or to show that there is no moral difference. So one of the most common experiments involves the so-called trolley problems. And these are variations on the issue of what we call in the law of criminal law, a necessity. Sometimes we break the law, sometimes we even kill people, and the law says we're justified in doing so. If in doing it, we're saving more people. So a common hypothetical given to law students and experimental subjects in this case is a trolley problem. Imagine that you're on a trolley, say in San Francisco or Seattle or Portland, going rapidly down a hill, and there's some kind of a problem with the trolley system, and the brakes no longer work. And you are the driver. You are not really driving it, but you are the conductor of the trolley. You're looking down, and what you see is that there is a station where you're going to arrive, and there are hundreds of people clustered there getting ready to get on who think that the trolley's going to stop, and it's actually going to plow right into them, killing scores of them. And if you do nothing, that is exactly what's going to happen. But if you push the switch, the trolley will go off on a sideline where there's a person sitting in a wheelchair right on that spot who's going to definitely die because there's no way to really get out of the way fast enough when the trolley hits them. What do you do? And by and large, what these studies show is that people choose to kill the single person and make a moral judgment that it's better to save more and that it's okay to do that, but they don't seem to have a very strong emotional reaction to it. It's just kind of an abstract judgment. Now, then they vary that a little bit. And one of the common variations of it, which Darley discusses, is it has a slightly different position. In this case, you're now on a bridge above this trolley accident about to happen. You see the same things I described. You see the same fates. But in this case, you don't have your hand on the switch. All you can do is push a very obese person next to you off of the bridge onto the tracks where they will stop or at least slow the train enough that it will certainly kill them, but it won't kill the scores of people. Now, interestingly, the point is that from a purely rational moral point of view, these should be equal outcomes. In each case, you're sacrificing one person or to save more people. But people have a very adverse reaction and don't think it's morally acceptable to push the person off. There's a variation of this that he discusses that involves the situation where people are hiding out from some soldiers or terrorists, say, who are going to kill all of them if they are found, and there's a baby who's crying, and the person has to decide whether to smother the baby in order to save all of them. And what the experiments show is that people are really resistant to smothering the baby, even though they understand the situation, but that if you kind of explain to them everybody's going to die, including the baby, if the terrorists, Nazis, or whatever find us, they'll do it. And the implication that's drawn is that the system one system has a very clear moral intuition that it's wrong to kill this baby, but it can be overridden by the system two, more reflective, deliberative system, if you create the conditions for that to happen by forcing the person to work through that problem. In the other trolley scenario, the reason the person has no problem agreeing to pull the switch is that doesn't really look to them as if they are doing a wrong to that person who gets killed. So again, it shows a couple of things. It shows, first of all, that our reasoning processes here follow two tracks, and that sometimes we can override the more powerful one, the intuitive one, with the reflective one, but only if we really try. But secondly, it shows us that intuitive one turns not so much on Kantian arguments about the morality in an abstract sense, and they turn more on people's very physically embodied metaphoric thinking about what it means to violate somebody else's space. One of the problems with the second version of the trolley problem is not just that you're more directly killing them, but you're physically having to do it, right? You're assaulting that person in a way that, again, morally, in a rational sense, doesn't seem to really make a difference, but it clearly makes a difference to people's moral judgments and intuitions about this. Now, there's another body, some of this research has been confirmed by another body of experiments or research that basically combines the trolley stories or versions of that kind of experiment where you're given a story and have to make a judgment about it. And it's added dynamic MRIs, or magnetic resolution imaging, is that what it means? Brain imaging, and there's actually a variety of ways to do it these days. But what this can show is what parts of the brain are being energized in real time while you're answering questions or working through problems. And what this does show is that when you ask people the sort of split trolley track version of this, that their heart, they don't get emotionally involved or engaged, and the parts of the brain associated with emotions and this kind of passionate experience is not energized. But when you talk about pushing the person into the train or smothering the baby, you're getting them. It's really interesting that even just the story, right? You might think you have to see the baby being smothered or something, but just the story is enough to actually trigger these parts of the brain that are much more associated with emotions and physio responses. Now, an interesting line, and this will be the last set of research findings I want to talk about, suggests that these may be important. That is, you might think, well, these intuitions are interesting, but maybe they don't mean very much, right? Maybe they don't have very much to do with what we actually do. Maybe they're just feelings that we have, right? We get all kinds of internal feelings, but we don't necessarily act on them. They don't necessarily influence our choices, our behavior. Do these punitive impulses, and especially this retributive notion that I feel like punishing you, even if there's no good I'm going to get out of it, just because it feels right. It feels like you deserve to be punished. Well, there are these games, and I think you can go online and participate in these various studies. But what they basically do is they set up an ongoing relationship between you and several other players. Sometimes some of those players are experimental participants rather than real subjects. Sometimes you're told that they're computers, actually, which creates an interesting variation. But basically, they're cooperation games. Typically, you pay money. If you put money into a pot that will be shared by everybody, that pot gets doubled or tripled or quadrupled by some ratio, and that gets divided up, so there's more money for everybody. but you don't know how much other people are going to give, and you can't take yours back when you find out how much they gave. So what happens is that people sometimes get pissed off at other people who didn't put very much in, who they feel have essentially gamed the system, been free riders, to use an economic notion. They put in a quarter, whereas I put in $5 to the pot, and so when we double that pot, they're going to get back an equal share, which is mostly going to be my, from my money. But what happens then is they give, in some of these games, they give people an opportunity to punish the free rider, and it costs something. You have to give up one of these units, which you get to cash out at the end of the experiment for, university logo coffee mugs or sweatshirts, other things you really, really want. And you have to spend some of these units to do it. And lo and behold, people do it. They actually spend some of these units to take away more units from other people. What this shows here is that, interestingly, when you play these, and this comes from the science article I asked you to read, people have said when you compare punishment games to no punishment games, maybe actually there's that there's more cooperation in the no punishment games. That punishment may be satisfying, but it doesn't actually produce more cooperation. And what some of these experiments now are trying to show is that if you run it long enough, it does produce more cooperation. That eventually, by punishing the people you're playing with, that changes their behavior. Notice that's bringing in a utilitarian notion, but it may increase, even though the motivation is still retributive, it may be having some deterrent value, and it may produce more cooperation over time. The top boxes there, the dark squares, is a long punishment game. Notice that compared to the short punishment game down here, which doesn't seem to have any real trend, the trend here seems to be up toward more cooperation, whereas the trend in the no punishment game is harder to read, but appears to be downward. Now, the folks who are doing this research do all kinds of things with it. For many of them, this is about evolution. This shows us that the reason we have a strong moral intuition to punish is probably that our ancestors who had that kind of a brain that had that feature, they call it a punishment feature, turned out to survive, or at least reproduce more successfully because perhaps they were part of groups that cooperated more effectively over time, back in the caveman era, as it were. Now, I actually am very skeptical about those kinds of arguments, but for my purposes, I think we can put them aside, because let's accept this story about retribution as true. Let's accept that this is essentially a system one brain function, that it tends to be about moral outrage rather than utilitarian considerations, that it's very fast, that it's unconscious, that it's tied up with emotion. And I want to take all of those and begin to move us toward a position where we may be able to use that research to think about some of the social cultural aspects of punishment. So the first thing to notice is the problem of who punishes, because these experiments are focusing on individual motivations, and they may be able to show that, in fact, these motivations actually lead people to act. But in our society, people don't just get punished by a bunch of people getting angry, picking up stones, and stoning a person, as might have taken place in biblical times, or in lynchings, even in modern society. Instead, the state punishes for us, and most of us have very limited relationship to that state apparatus. So it's not at all clear, at least at first glance, what this system of moral psychology means in terms of this. But I actually think we can see some interesting implications. So first of all, think about the jury, which is one of the few examples in our legal system where individuals do get, in a sense, a chance to punish. And I should qualify that because typically a jury isn't told what the punishment is that the person is going to face if they're convicted. Unless you're on a capital jury, you're not allowed to actually choose the punishment. That's the only example in our system now where people get to actually choose the punishment. Nonetheless, there is a way in which jurors do, by convicting somebody, they decide that somebody is eligible to be punished. And I think people know that. They understand that, even if they're not told exactly how much. From that point of view, there's a few interesting things to notice. One is that our system is rapidly ceasing to use juries very much, and it may be very significant in terms of the long-term legitimacy of our system, that if, in fact, people have a moral intuition about punishment, and if there's some importance in aligning our state system with that moral intuition, then the jury could be seen as an important institution for trying to do that, and it seems to be falling into disuse. Another thing to notice is, think about movies or TV when you see the jury, which is the only place you're likely to see it these days. What you see is deliberation, right? And that is what juries are supposed to do, right? They're not allowed to take things like television or their cell phones in and get sort of input from the outside world. They're supposed to talk about the evidence that's been put forward, which has been filtered by the judge to make sure it's not too prejudicial, doesn't trigger pure emotions, it's rational. The deliberations have to be rational. If you start huffing and puffing and screaming at fellow jurors, you'll be removed, and probably there may be an effort to bring back, but there are real issues. The point is, I think you can see that in many respects, whether intended to be or not, the jury is a machine for turning system one thinking into system two thinking. Or to put it another way, it's a machine for taking people's system one impulses about who deserves to be punished and forcing them, much like the experimenters did in some versions of the trolley game, to work through rationally another judgment and check that first judgment. So in a sense, rather than the jury being a machine to sort of unleash this moral intuition, it's a machine to actually qualify it and balance it. And that, I think, explains in an interesting way one of the values of the jury. But every good lawyer understands that no matter what we might want, system one thinking is going to prevail on the jury. And that's why, as much as the judge will let them, they're going to try to send signals to the jury that are really aimed at triggering system one. And we'll talk about, and that comes up in other aspects of penal policymaking as well. But if you're a prosecutor, that means getting a chance to pass the crime scene photos around the jury, not necessarily to prove your point about the direction that the blood splatter was going in, but so that the juror has to look at the blood spatter and feel the moral outrage that seeing a terribly injured body tends to create in people. And by the same token, the defense lawyer is going to fight tooth and nail to keep those photos out, because she knows that that is going to trigger a system one response, no matter how much the judge's instructions are going to say you must consider this under system two reasoning. Now, the other place that we as citizens punish or get to act in a way around who gets punished is through politics, by electing representatives, by voting on ballot initiatives. Here's an original missing persons poster for Polly Klaas, the then 12-year-old Sonoma girl who was kidnapped by a scary-looking guy. Turned out to be a former prisoner, Richard Allen Davis, who then raped her and murdered her. Public outrage at this is considered by most historians and political scientists to be the major reason that 3 strikes was enacted in 1994. And that raises a lot of interesting questions. You might think that one of the functions of having a legislature, write our penal statutes and our length of time in prison, etc., is that a legislature is likely to function in a system 2 cognitive way more than a system 1 cognitive way. That is reason, debate, deliberation. Maybe not, but that's at least a premise. That raises an interesting point because, as you know, and as I just mentioned, California is fairly unique in having ballot initiatives. And when you're thinking about why California may have more extreme laws on its books than some other states, this looks like an explanation, right? Whereas in most states, this moral intuition to punish and punish severely gets filtered through a legislature in which people who don't want to build very many prisons and pay more taxes, people who want to spend money on redeveloping or building high-speed rail or doing something else, it gets log rolled in Sacramento or in Albany. That tends to sort of put system 2 in the driver's seat and qualify system 1. But in a voter initiative, while we might wish that all voters were engaging in some kind of Lincoln Douglas debate with their spouse about whether or not to vote for propositions, we suspect that that's not true. That these tend to be very hot-button issues. You get robocalls telling you there's going to be murders on the streets and things of this nature that tend to push you. So what I want to do is offer you a kind of theory to connect the psychology of punishment to the sort of social, cultural, historical study that we're going to do for much of the rest of the term. And what I want to do is describe it as a theory of penal heat. And as we'll see next week when we look at Durkheim, who's in a sense the first sociologist that we'll look at, this is a kind of social psychology of punishment that has a lot of connection to the research traditions that Darley is describing here. But my metaphor of the reactor here is simply this. If we take what the psychologists are telling us, it appears that when individuals are confronted with behavior that outrages their moral values, which at least overlaps with the category of crime, right? There's going to be some things that don't fit that, other things that aren't crimes that morally outrage us anyway, but a lot of crimes are things that morally outrage us. When people encounter those, either directly as victims or by reading about stories about them or hearing about them on TV, etc., it produces not ideas in a cognitive rational system 2 sense, but feelings, powerful intuitions that are emotional and that are hot in a metaphoric sense, right? Not hot in a sexy sense, hot in a hot sense. It's to the touch. Like we're talking about a hot-blooded person in the law of murder, or heat of passion. Right? We're talking about hot as opposed to cold, where cool would suggest a kind of calming down, a more relaxed, calmer, a more abstract perspective. Heating up is up close, it's emotional, it involves strong feelings and often impulses to act. And what I want to suggest with this metaphor here is that we can think of the penal part of the legal system in many ways as a device, a mechanism for channeling penal heat for society's benefit and to protect society from some of the consequences of penal heat. Right? When people feel penal heat, for instance, when an outrageous crime happens, when an outrageous thing happens, their whole trust in society can be put into question. We can see this often, for instance, in China now, where because it's growing so rapidly, etc., you often get shoddily built schools, etc. And when you've had seismic activity and like schools have collapsed and many kids have died, events like this happen. Similar things happen in America's industrial growth period. You get real outrage where people are not, or when they see something like that happen, they not only want to punish the people who built the building, etc. They burn down the party headquarters or tear down City Hall. They question the legitimacy of government. So part of the function of the legal penal system is to channel that penal heat in ways that will serve society or the elites that rule society, serve their interests, and channel it in ways that will keep it away from dangerous places. So I want to just leave that sort of as a background theory that we know that crime generates penal heat, and part of the function of a penal system is to manage that penal heat in some ways. Now, in the closing minutes of the lecture, I want to raise a number of implications that I think come out of this. So implication one, what I'm calling malum prohibitum, is this. When the state punishes people for violating laws that are not widely recognized as morally binding, it may not count on its actions resonating with public moral approval. In other words, if this theory about punishment and the moral psychology of punishment is correct, what happens when the state tries to punish people for crimes that actually don't line up with people's moral intuitions? Those are what we call malum prohibitum, crimes, where the state has made something a crime not because it's inherently morally wrong, although we can debate whether drug use is morally wrong. Here's an example of medical cannabis, which actually in this state is now legal, but it's still a federal crime. Whether or not it's, some people may think it's morally wrong. Clearly, it's illegal, and the government has made it illegal for reasons of public health, for reasons of preventing other crimes, etc. And we can think of lots of other crimes like that. There may be crimes against carrying loaded weapons on some circumstances. There's nothing inherently immoral about carrying a loaded weapon, but it can be a crime because of a regulation, etc. So here's the point. Is it possible for the state to punish people who have committed crimes that aren't morally outrageous to people, don't generate this kind of penal heat? Yes. But when they do, we ought to assume that two things might be happening. One, that the state is in a sense not getting any positive feedback from the public when it does that. It can't expect that to generate support for and sympathy with the state. But secondly, that it may actually delegitimate it, right? Part of the reason that you get a lot of antagonism around drug law today is that for many people it's an example of punishment that's not based on moral consensus, but rather that it's based on either some people's values being imposed on others or state policies being imposed on people's freedom for reasons that don't go to protecting other people narrowly enough. So that's one implication. Again, crimes aren't always going to be the things that we may want to punish. We may want to define some things as crimes that aren't morally outrageous, but when we do so, we're potentially putting the system at risk by making it less legitimate. Second implication, crime and punishment. When observers see penal justice itself as being unfair, undeserved, or overly brutal, it can lead to that same sense of moral outrage that people experience when they see a crime. So imagine, back in 1991, most of you weren't born yet, that was Rodney King, who was beaten into that condition by the LAPD. Actually, the peace was kept immediately after that, but over a year later, when police officers were acquitted in a trial for this, in absence essentially of punishing them for what a lot of people took to be the morally outrageous treatment of Rodney King, there was a terrible riot, right? Now, one thing you can say about a riot is that it's a way that people express this kind of moral heat when they don't feel like the system is channeling it, right? That's one of the reasons we might want to channel penal heat in a legal system, is to prevent people from just expressing that anger in the form of civil disorder. But that highlights the fact that when the police use too much force, it doesn't always line up with people's moral intuitions. If people see that as unfair and unjustified, it can actually not only delegitimize the system, it can produce the exact same kind of desire for punishment that crime itself does. And that takes me back to a point I was trying to make about Brown versus Plata. By exposing Californians to really sickening scenes of degradation, and I would just say torture-like conditions in which mentally ill and physically ill prisoners have been kept, there's a real possibility of a kind of moral outrage factor coming into the equation in punishment in California, right? We tend to think about the moral equation mostly running in favor of prison, as people are morally outraged by various crimes and therefore support lots of tough prison laws. But here's a kind of reverse moment, where a scene of moral outrage inside prison spurs people to question that. And this isn't the first time that's happened. Actually, throughout penal history,